You know what you're doing, Joe.
Danita just asked my own. I don't. But while we're waiting to for our guests to come back in, I did want to welcome you all officially to Chapel Hill Public Library, session 2 of this year's book club. We've got more people today, so I know that there are some folks who were here last week, some new faces. Somebody didn't, but I didn't even say it yet, so.
I don't know who said it.
I bet, it might be, I don't know. The thing I always say is, you know, you have a phone on you, and you think your phone is off, but you're gonna be the one whose phone rings when Lois Deloatch is singing. Blair Kelley might be saying something really profound, and your phone is gonna ring. Don't let that be you. Turn your phones off. I'm going a little bit longer because I am waiting for Kelley to come back in. But I'm Molly. I'm the Community History Coordinator here at Chapel Hill Public Library. I know most of you, those of you I don't know, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to have this program. We didn't know if we would be able to, because we didn't have funding for this program. We had a little bit of funding from the Friends of Chapel Hill Public Library, but not enough to get the food, not enough to pay our artists, not enough to do some of the important things that we feel are central to this book club, which is all about building community. But lucky for us, community stepped up and we got an amazing donation from one community member, Dottie Henninger. I don't see her in the room, but I'm so grateful to her because she made this possible. But any donations, especially those earmarked for the community history program, that go to the Friends of the Library, really do support these programs. Because in these days, that funding has all but dried up, usual sources. So anything is always appreciated. What else? We're going to hear very shortly from Danita Mason-Hogans, who I also think most of y'all know. Either you know her, you might be her parents, you might be her husband, you might be cousins, friends. But those of you who don't know her, Danita is really the visionary, along with Simona, of this entire series. And most everything that we do around community history. Oh, look, here's Danita. Hey, Simona, did you do anything?
I need to put the display down. She wants things.
Okay.
You want me to do it now? Yes.
I am so happy to see y'all. Thank you so much for coming. For me, these book club services
Sorry about that.
are like family reunion. I don't love having together with you. So
Are you ready?
sometimes we start a little late.
Sorry.
And I'm so happy to be here and grateful for you.
A long, long way from home after a long, hard day. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. I'm a long, long way. I'm a long, long way. A long, long way from home.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Robin, if you can. Blair, I wanted to introduce you to some of my people. In the last time that we were together, we talked about how history holds a different place depending on who writes it. And that Black people in Chapel Hill were not on the margins of history, we were history. And when you think of history in that way, from my perspective, it helps us to look at history and look for things. And Robin McLaughlin had a very nice part, in a piece in the last, pamphlet to tell us to look at history differently. And so the certificate that you see up here is of my great grandfather and his wife. And if you look at the dates where they were married, it was in 1895. And oftentimes people would tell me when I was coming up that Black people could not get married during that time. And so it helped me look at things differently. Then on the right is my great grandfather on my father's side. That's Granddaddy Ernest and his wife, Nettie, who was pregnant, I believe, with my aunt Margie. And if you look at those rocks, they tell the story. Those rocks look similar to the rocks that you see on campus. Granddaddy and other people during his generation killed those rocks. And we see those patterns repeated again in 1947, when the B-180 said, what was the community to build them. So your work is so beautiful to me, Blair, because it looks at history through the gaze of our people who paint them so beautifully with your words. So the first, what I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to read this quote. I picked out some of my favorite quotes from the book. And the first is, Black people were keen observers of the world around them, critiquing the wider society and its hierarchies. They understood the profound value of their labor, even when they were thought of as just chattel, and later as emancipated people. In the first moments of freedom, they took advantage of their mobility and sought out not only improved working conditions, but stronger connections to their families, past and present. They built unions all their own, and even if they had no choice but to take jobs similar to the ones they had done in bondage, they organized new neighborhoods and communities. They erected schools and churches. They taught their children to see America as twisted as it was by the legacy of slavery and its aftermath through their own eyes. So the first question I have for you, Blair, is what happens when we move Black workers from the margins to the center of the story?
That part of the book is from the introduction. And what's been powerful for me is the practice of writing theory, but writing it in a way that people can understand. I like theory, I enjoy it, but I like to read, and I like the flow of reading. And my favorite author is Toni Morris. Even though we're told not to worship her, as Morrison tells us, just plain, that the language, the rhythm of it, she teaches us that it has meaning, that it has resonances, that it can be bigger than us. And so when I was writing this part, I wanted to talk about racial capitalism, right? So the idea that if we understand the world correctly, and you can see that race and labor are at the center of how this nation has been constituted. You can try to take Black people out of it, but you'll miss it. But what's always missing for me in that way of thinking is that Black people understood it all along. So oftentimes when you read history, Black people are acted upon. They are not actors. They are not the people who are deciding how they're going to perceive it. So even if they're not free, they're not fooled by what's happening in the world. They are keen observers of the world around them. And I have evidence of that. Because in the very first moments of freedom, Black people organize. Black people tell the world what they want. My favorite example of that is in 1866, a group of Black women who had been enslaved came together to form a union in Jackson, Mississippi. They were washerwomen. We oftentimes think of washerwomen as my editor early in our project of writing together, working together. Said, oh, meals. I'm like, ooh. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna make a little style guide where you never say that word again. And that word doesn't appear in my book. Other than to say they were thought of as. But washerwomen were not menial. They were skilled. They made their own soap. They got refuse and burnt that up so that they could make the fires in the big pots. And not only did they do that, they organized themselves so that they could live lives different than the lives they had been allowed to live as women in bondage. They said, I'm not going to work under the supervision of a white person. I'm going to work in my own yard. I'm going to be able to raise my own children. Because enslaved women were often separated from their children, systematically so. So much so that sometimes when Frederick Douglass recalls that he does not know what his mother's face looked like. He never saw it in daylight. And so they wanted to take back that power. If I'm free, I may not have much, but I'm gonna work where I want to work. I'm gonna raise my children. And so if you look at pictures of washerwomen, they're often in the yard and they're working collectively with one another and they're working alongside their daughters. And they're teaching them that trade. And so when we look at Jackson, Mississippi in 1866, this is the year after they're emancipated. 1 year later, they write a document that says, this is when we'll do our work. This is the price of our work. And if you try to mess with us, none of us will be doing any of this labor. They formed a union. No one had to tell them what labor meant. No one had to raise their consciousness. They had their consciousness. It was theirs. And so when I was in graduate school, I was taught that Black workers in the South had to be taught to join unions. The white Northerners came South in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and organized Black workers. And they did. But they were organizing people who already understood. And so for me, if you put Black people back at the center of how you think of labor in this country, we have evidence that they always were conscious of what part they played. They were always conscious of the power of their labor and the withdrawal of it and the giving. And they were willing to negotiate on those terms. Enslaved people were, and free people. And so if you tell the American story, you have to tell it from their perspective. When I was growing up, oftentimes people would say, go back to Africa. We live in a white suburb in South Jersey. Most of my neighbors' parents came to this country or their grandparents. My ancestors can be traced back before the American Revolution. 90% of the people who are descended from enslaved people in this nation, that's also true for them. So the idea that Black people are not fundamentally American is very interesting. So what's powerful is that you have to recenter, you have to place Black men, Black women, Black children, Black workers, Black consciousness back at the center of the American story, and then tell it again, and then see what you know about this nation's history. Because without us at the center of it, you're missing something.
I think that's so beautiful. And the first time that I read your book, I felt like, oh, I love books. Sometimes it's a real good book. You know how you feel like you can just all in the pages and just read the book. And your writing was the first that I had read that really talked about the process of the washerwoman. And it took me back to my grandmother's house when she used to put clothes on the line. A lot of people in our family, of course, work for the university laundry. Could people raise their hand in here if any of your relatives work at the laundry? So the people whose hands are raised are what we call historical witnesses. And what your writing has done for me is to bring me back to the smell of my grandma's house. So she would put the clothes on the line and then invite the neighbor in for conversation, and how that was just really cultural, talking about those really important things, how Anne Reese, who was a washerwoman, was, also the head of the church. And that organized in fashion, and oh my Lord, Lois, the way people sang and brought in community. So, I wanna transition a little bit and ask Lois to take us to another phase where we're talking about just the song and the culture of what happened.
I want to do a snippet of a song that was written by, Dr. Billy Taylor, who was a native North Carolinian, who years ago ran the Jazzmobile in New York City. He was on Sunday morning on CBS. He wrote this song, but it was made more famous, or most famous, by Danita Mason-Hogans. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all these chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I can't say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. Oh, I wish I could share all this love that's in my heart and remove all the bars that keep us apart. Oh, how I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free. Oh, I wish that I could give all I'm longing to give. And I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things that I can do. And though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. Oh, I wish I could be like a bird up in the sky. Then I could see that I could fly. Oh, I soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I sing, 'cause I know. Oh, yes, I'd sing, 'cause I know. Oh, I would sing, 'cause I know that every man should be free.
All right. Thank you so much. And now, again, what draws me to your writing is that, when I was coming up, I never was ashamed of the labor that my grandmothers, who were both housekeepers, my grandfather, who was a laborer, I was never ashamed. We were never brought up to be ashamed of who they were. And it seems
Always said, I'm working to do this labor.
that's right. That's right. And this is my grandfather. This picture is a little fuzzy, but he's actually the one in the middle. He worked at the Carolina Inn for 50 years. And I remember going with my grandfather to the Carolina Inn. I thought first of all, I thought he was rich. Because granddaddy worked as what they would call a bellboy, what was a bellman now. But granddad always used to have his change in his pocket, and his pockets used to be so heavy with change. And we would go to the store, and he would let me buy Doritos and a soda. It was like clearly granddaddy was rich, and he would go to community meetings, and he was a Mason, in the lodge, and he had so much respect in the community, and I just thought my grandfather was just the greatest man on earth, next to my dad. And I remember one time I was proudly walking with granddaddy to the Carolina Inn, holding his hand, And granddaddy stopped by Carolina Inn for something. And a young white college student was like, boy, come here. And who he talking to? He's not talking to my granddaddy, calling my granddaddy. And so I was ready to back granddaddy up, because young folks didn't talk to people like that. And granddaddy said, well, it's okay, Danita, this is just what they do. And that really did something to me. They didn't know how great my grandfather was. And so the part that you write about in your book, when you talk about the myths that you dismantle about respectability and surveillance inside, I want to read a little portion of this. And the way that you talk about those Lois. Oscar had a desire to be perceived as a man too, and putting on his Pullman uniform got him closer as he saw it. However, the corrosive politics of race still shaped his everyday experience in his new job. Indeed, each time Oscar Singleton heard the word boy reading out of the mouths of what he called his most segregated passengers, the word hit like a punch to the chest. His first thought was always, who did they think they were calling? He was clearly a man. His crisp black uniform only emphasized his broad shoulders, and his polished demeanor was that of an educated man. His very stride was a clear reminder that he was no boy. That word boy was a remnant of slavery and the language of those striving to keep the color line alive in the changing world. White men used the term to degrade, emasculate, and dehumanize. And we have a tradition of that in Chapel Hill. And then I would also like to add to that. Manifestations of profound desire to silence Black dissent, voiced by new issue Negroes, who vigorously contested second-class citizenship. White Southerners embraced the old-time Negroes, the ex-slaves they considered their uncles and nannies, honoring them in songs and poems and paying for their funerals when they passed away. Those mammy funerals were an elaborate undertaking put on by Southern segregationists trying to memorialize happy servitude. Now, last week, we talked about this, and we talked about this need for white folks to have this reminiscent vision of the old South when Black people kind of knew their place and loved it. And I think it's worth noting that there was an attempt to have a Mammy statue in Washington, D.C. And it was a tribute to Mammy. It's also interesting that the person who put that billboard was a congressperson out of Pittsburgh, Michigan. His name is Charles Kelley. And he wanted to have an ode to Mammy. Can you imagine going to DC and it was a Black lady to be organized and checking real quick on the version. But I do want to talk about the beautiful way in which you talked about how Black people perceive themselves. And also this whole notion of needing to get into this respectability type of term that people wanted to glam onto.
I love writing about the poem borders because I taught about them the whole time I was teaching in class. I find out a way to get them into every course I taught because there's such an incredible history and they just interconnect us to so many different important things to know about the Black experience. And so for folks who are unfamiliar, on interstate trains, historically, they were shifted over from daytime seating into nighttime sleeping. And that was invented by a man named George Mortimer Pullman. And he was from upstate New York. And he wanted, he was comfortable. And so, so that people wouldn't have to sit and sleep sitting up. And so he made a fortune becomes captain of industry. And in part, he wanted to hire Black men to be reminiscent of his time in slavery. And you would be a wealthy white patron who had a Black manservant, elegant, well-spoken, but waiting on you came foot and doing anything that they could think of that they wanted while they were on this train ride. So he wanted them educated. He wanted them hands. He had to submit a photograph when we applied for a job. But he didn't want them to certain because he was very controlling in slavery. If anyone knows American history, you know the Golden Strikes. He was fighting and almost into the slave workers. So he was certainly very controlling of the Black workers. But what he ends up doing by accident is hiring thousands of Black men across the country who are educated, who are nice looking, now well-traveled, and familiar with all these different communities around the country, and they all work together. So he ends up being the largest private employee of educated Black men in the United States. And so you know what's going to happen when you do that. They're going to organize. And they're not only going to organize on behalf of themselves, so they end up becoming the largest Black private union in American history. The Brotherhood of Civil Law Workers in the 1930s, after the New Deal legislation finally opened their doors. They've been organizing under A. Philip Randolph's leadership for decades. But then they also end up helping usher in the civil rights movement and changes in federal employment and all those things. So it was a joy for me to write about them because they are this change agent. They usher in migration, they guide this history, but they're men who have to put up with this very corrosive way of life. They have to be called George, after George Michael, and not their names. They have to be called boy. They have to be treated poorly to just split up with everyday life. And so that balance of, being beautiful and handsome, and, sharp, and those energetic and smart, and still the need as part of your job alignment, tells us a bit about the idea of respectability, right? That Black people wanted to make sure that there was nothing you could say that they weren't doing. It was all on race. They were educated, they were well spoken, they were well put together, they were panel, they were appropriate. It was you that had the problem. And so I think for me, oftentimes, this generation misunderstands respectability as that Black people thought somehow that if they were good enough, then white people were going to like them. They wanted to make sure that there was no question that what the issue was you and your racism, not them and their excellence, because they were excellent. And so what's powerful for me in the story that you remember of your grandfather is that you saw his excellence, his community. He was resonant in his community, no matter what he did. I grew up in a church where we didn't know what those people did. Black people don't ask you like, what you do for a living. They ask you who you are, what you want to do. And so in my community, in my grandparents' community, my grandfather was a deacon. He put on that white suit, he loved the white suit. And he was sharp, he had a beautiful voice. And my grandmother, deaconess, and all white. I'm a fourth generation deaconess on both sides. And just me, there was nobody playing that little rickety out of tune piano, but they sounded so beautiful. And they would serve and feed people and minister to the sick and run the funerals. They ran that church. And so I never thought, oh, my grandparents aren't good people. They had land, they grew their own food, they canned, they preserved, they were amazing. I could go to my grandparents, I'm like, this is great. And run around and water everything and dig and have a good time in South Jersey, mind you. We brought that South North with them. And I never questioned whether to respect based on what they did. And so I think knowing that Black metrics of what is meaningful and to be respected. It's its own thing. It's not when my editor came up with the idea of a book about the Black working class. I said, well, how would you write it? But the first thing he said to me, he was talking about a book by Nancy Eisenberg called White Trash. And he's like, well, what do you like trash? And I was like, so much so that he now claims he never said.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. And so, what stuck in my head was, why is that so nails on the chalkboard for me? Like, why, so maybe I'm writing a book about why that just, Black life is not just the opposite of white life. It's its own particular. And for me, that tension between how we see ourselves and how the world is seeing us is always so interesting to explore.
I just love that. And I love the fact that, I love your emphasis and focus on the 30s and the 40s. And I've really fallen in love with that period because oftentimes we talk about enslavement and we talk about the civil rights era. But, I contend that it was those brothers from World War II in that generation. Even with my grandfather, I don't know if y'all know, but even the architecture of the Carolina Inn was symbolic of the antebellum South. Their uniforms, and I think Mike has written about this. Their uniforms are to be reminiscent of the servants in the house during enslavement. So this is something that is constructed for sure. The thing I really enjoyed about reading about was there was a race riot in 1937 in Chapel Hill. This is how we got Harvard. That's a whole nother story. But during that time, Chapel Hill was the center of Klan activity. And am I right, historical witnesses?
Yeah.
And would we go to Carver once the sun was down? So, but what was cool is that the Klan came to town one time and they went to the Carolina Inn and they wanted to be served. So the mind of the people who employed them, in their mind, they were there for servitude and that was their servant. But in their mind, this was the day that they were not going to serve them at the Carolina Inn. And shortly thereafter, joined the Janitors Association to organize for better labor. And so I'm very proud to think of my granddad being part of that story. And he was married to my grandmother, Lois, and she played the piano at St. Joseph's CME Church there for 75 years. Grandmother even had all summers. You get throw away from that time. Yeah. And so music has always been integral, as Blair was talking about the deacons in the church and how the church was always connected to community. And I know young folks don't go to church like we used to, but the church is where we found community. Church is where we stay together and develop. And so I was just wondering if you could share some stuff with us.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have to say, and I think Freddie Parker probably knows this too, this really quickly when you talked about your being called boy. Dr. John Franklin, who we had the pleasure of being friends with, talked about the night he received, I think it was his presidential medal, or one of his medals, and coming out of, Diane remembers this, a young man, white man, handed him his keys. This John Hope Franklin in his suit. At 8-7 years old at the time. Handed him his keys and as if to say, boy, go get my car. I mean, this is in Washington, D.C.
At the Cosmos Club.
Yeah, at the Cosmos Club, private club.
My favorite John Hope Franklin was when the library named the space after him. He said, Duke was always so kind to me. They used to let me come in at night.
That's right,
To
yeah.
do my research.
Yes, 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 yes. And this is not ancient history, this is new business. So that, but yes, and whether it's in urban areas or rural areas, the church is a place of development. And going back to the idea of dignity, respectability, and work, in sort of that sacred spiritual context, work is viewed as a form of worship, a divine calling, and a means of stewardship, as well as a way to make a living. Work provides opportunities to deepen your relationship with God and to serve others on earth. And many of the songs evoke and talk about that, whether it's the song, "May the work I done speak for me. May the work I've done speak for me. When I'm resting in my grave and there is nothing that can be said. May the work I've done speak for me. The work I've done may seem so small, and sometimes it seems like nothing at all. But when I stand before my God, I want to hear him say, "Well done." May the work I've done speak for me. And the one I am attracted to, particularly around Blair's work, there's a union in the heaven where I belong. There's a union in the heaven where I belong. There's a union in the heaven where I belong. Oh, I belong to the union land. There is singing in the heaven where I belong. Yeah, there's singing in the heaven where I belong. There is singing in the heaven where I belong. Oh, I belong to the union.
Don't those feel like home? Thank you, Lois. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know it's not really down. Down. Lord. So I'm gonna transition a little bit to community and talk about the organizing tradition in the community. What is interesting to me, Blair, is you have a quote in your book. And it says, Mississippi in 1961. Longtime activist Ella Baker sent him to Ansley Moores. Ansley found a kindred spirit in the young organizer, and they began the work that would one day lead to Freedom Summer Movement of 1964. It was Ansley's partnership with Bob Moses and Smith that would see him fired from the post office on April 1st, 1961. After he was told that he was dismissed because of his civil rights work, he called the Justice Department to demand his job back. Kennedy administration Justice Department officer John Doerr brought Ansley to Washington, where he determined that there was no due cause for Ansley Moore's dismissal and ordered the local postmaster to reinstate him. And so this inspired me to look and talk to my father. My great grandfather that you saw also worked for the post office. And in Chapel Hill, because it was a federal position, these were one of the few positions that paid people fairly for their wages. So it was very difficult to get that post office job. My granddaddy worked at the post office. He lost it. I decided that I won't say why. He was doing that. He should. But thinking about how the Black community in Chapel Hill rallied around young people at such a great cost. And I've had the pleasure of working with the Smith Rhodes and specifically Bob Moses, who told those stories, and Hollis Watkins, who said that people used to take their NAACP cards and hide them, men of the 30s and the 40s, and they all used to organize at nighttime together. And Hollis Watkins talks about one time where he was working in the field with his father and his NAACP membership card fell out of his pocket. And he did not even know that his father was in the NAACP, that he was in fact a race member. And I think about my grandfather and all of the other World War II vets. I think about cousin Braxton, I think about, all of the mentors that y'all had. '60s didn't come out from anywhere. I like to believe that, granddad planted the seeds to have my father be one of the young people who started the Chapel Hill movement. But what's intriguing and interesting me, our jobs were almost solely dependent on that university employment. And as soon as they did that sit-in, the rest of the community came out and supported them, whether they worked for the university or not. And it really reminded me of Nancy's story, and your writing really inspired me to dig deeper into that history. And the fact that with these sit-ins, and that's T.T. Bashir and Jordan Austin, who put it on the line for the sit-ins. But what I think is little told is how the community rallied around these young people. And really, it jumped into the heart. So I wanted to talk with you about the part of your book, and will you talk a little bit about what it meant for working class people in Mississippi to risk their federal jobs because they were organized? Because you talked about those folks in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Writing about the post office was really incredible and such a gift. Oftentimes we associate Black life with the post office. It is the largest number of people who work in the federal government who are Black work in the post office historically. But it was a problem. And to have those jobs was really incredible. And what was striking to me is that postal work is the only work delineated, working class labor delineated in the American Constitution. And Black people did not have access to those jobs for decades until after the Civil War. And then with the Civil War, they finally fight their way literally into the ranks of postal workers. Oftentimes when I teach my students about this history, I mentioned the movie Glory, and they don't remember it because they're born, in this century. And but in the movie Glory, the Massachusetts 54th is depicted. One of the men who fought in the real Massachusetts 54th, William Carney, becomes probably the second postal worker, Black money postal worker, hired to the United States in 1866. He wears his Union coat when he's delivering the mail. And so the way that Black men have to fight for access to postal work tells us a lot about why a century later, Black male postal workers are still in the fight. Andrew Moore is a veteran, and he is determined when he returns to Mississippi to make sure that he's a citizen of the country. And so he systematically, over decades, from the end of the Second World War, works to make Mississippi free. So there's no accident that there's a marriage of federal work and veteran that you mentioned. And so what's really incredible is to see people like Andrew Moore. He was always risking everything. He got a GI loan to build his house, and he wanted to make sure it was built to brick because he said they're gonna be trying to burn my house. And so I want to build a brick house. They won't be able to line it up. And so he was primed for fight. He was fighting for the country, so he was fighting for himself. He was fighting for his community. He was a businessman. He was serious. And so, what an incredible thing to be living in Mississippi and call the federal government. So they had to nerve to fire me here. Now you can't fire me. So do I need to go up to DC? And he's like, yeah, come on up, And he flies to DC and gets his job back and comes back to Mississippi to continue to battle the people who fired. So I think, that tells you everything you need to know about that generation, about what difference it made just to be treated fair, just to be paid the same as others. There was nothing special. There was no carve out. There was no DEI involved. It was simply an opportunity that Black people fought for over generations, just to have equal access to the same things.
I love that story, and I also love talking with the SNCC folk, and they would talk about how Ansley Moore poured into young people and how important that was. And one of his proteges was Hollis Watkins. And I believe Hollis Watkins is one of the greatest organizers this country has ever seen. And he had that organized structure down to a T, and he was taught by Ansley Moore. What I loved about him, Lois, is that he could light up any room, and Brother Hollis would come up in the room and he'd say, "All right, what side are you on?" And this Brother Hollis was in his 80s, and he could come and young children, 14, 15, we on the freedom side, you know, and for me, your work is so reminiscent of that, Lois. In fact, I don't know if you remember in 2015 when we had a gathering of the SNCC folks, Lois led us through song. And I don't know if I ever told you that, but the SNCC folks were just so involved with the beautiful way in which you told that movement history.
So, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We gon' keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom day. Ain't gonna let your hatred turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let your hatred. We gon' keep on walking, keep on talking, walking on the freedom land. How I got over, how I got over, you know my soul looks back and wonder how I got over, how we got over, how we got over, you know my soul looks back and wonder how we got over, and we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And we really need this one. We shall live in peace. Yes, yes. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
To keep book clubs together is like a lot of work. But I have been laughing and grinning and just in my bag the whole week because of Lois and Blair. I said, Thursday, I'm gonna be like, I'm just gonna enjoy the show. And I wanna thank you so much. And I wanna share with y'all that, Blair has a new book. And she pulled it out of her bag. I was like, ooh. She said, you can't have this. Oh, God. But it's so nice. It's so nice. And it just, and when I thought it couldn't get better. This is Black Freedom, a visual history of Juneteenth and Emancipation Days. And I was asked to speak for the town of Carrboro and decided to dive into our history and see what people were doing around Freedom Time here. And what I found out is our Juneteenth here in Chapel Hill actually occurred in April in 1965. And people gathered over in what is St. Paul's Church. And Cornelia Spencer talks about the Black people that gathered there and celebrated and ate food and had fun together. And it got me to thinking about how emancipation looked different depending on where you live. And I thought it would be really cool because we don't know a lot about emancipation. If somebody would just kind of explain that history to us and what it meant to their particular locales locally. And what do you know? Blair, speak my mind. And not only is this a beautifully this hardcover is just so nice. It's like a leather. Oh, it's beautiful. But there are photos inside of it, so photo history. Did y'all know take your photos back then? And she talks about the history of it. So Blair, I was just wondering if you would share a little bit about your upcoming book. And as you see, the QR code is there. So it's
also in your
book. We do have people.
It's also in the booklet.
It's also in the booklet. Thank you, Mom.
I'm so excited to have the opportunity to work on this project. And as you said, I've been a person who's been teaching about emancipation because emancipation was also a site of resistance and organization. So when I wrote my first book, which was about streetcar boycott that happened at the turn of the 20th century when Black people organized to get the beginnings of segregation, not just at the end, but at the very beginning and as long as the they would use the Emancipation Day celebrations as a means to push back against the cities where they lived. And so that's when I fell in love with the idea of thinking about Juneteenth and emancipation as a means of speaking back, of telling history, of telling the world that we know our own history. Black people are historians within community. They are historians everywhere. So the opportunity to gather those pictures and pull those histories and talk about Juneteenth and that, but also talking about all these different places around the country that are using emancipation as an argument against both, what slavery was and what segregation was and what inequality was. It was really a joy. And so it was a long time coming, a long time in my career, but 3 years of working on this and gathering picture by picture, because there's not big collections of these pictures anywhere. Oftentimes there's like one picture in an entire collection that may have been relevant if I was lucky. So it was just wonderful to have these pictures gathered and to see them in real life. I was more excited than I thought I would be, and I got it. But it's just been an incredible thing to tell the story of freedom. And for me, thinking about Black history in this moment, when it is being attacked, when there are people who are attempting to dismantle the spaces that memorialize Black history, it's a reminder to me that Black people didn't need the federal government to teach them how to celebrate their freedom. And it will continue anyway, because that's where it started. Black History Month didn't start, but someone said we could. It was started by people who wanted to preserve history and memory on their own. emancipation celebrations, but, you know, I write about the celebration in Raleigh, that happened the moment of freedom. They put on their most beautiful dresses, they sewed, they made banners, memorializing the history of Black veterans in the Civil War and carried them, down the street. The right newspapers, they wrote an article, why would come out of the house, they're so scared, because they were determined to make their freedom real in those first moments. And so, I think it's just so powerful to remember that no permission to be it.
Who said period? Okay, so, oh, now it's supposed to close out. Yes, please, please.
This is for this. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom. We shall not be moved. Oh, we're fighting for our freedom. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. We shall not be moved. Oh, we shall not be moved. Oh, we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
We have another handful of. Before I invite Simona to come up and take some questions for you, I have enough sense to handle business first. So, you know, for those of you who come to the bookstore, that in the tradition of George Moses Horton, we always pass the bowl for the artist to show the artistry is labor. And we pass the bowl and we give the proceeds of the bowl to the artist in appreciation of what we've done. My big, beautiful sister Lois said that the money that I collected tonight, she is going to donate back to the organization. So in addition to the wonderful donation that I included your name, we're going to use that and we're going to have some food next week. Pass the bowl, thank you, parents. And actually, I was going to do this later. I want you to know if there are any elected officials, would you please stand up? You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Danny on the cover of Town Council.
I want to say a special thank you and shout out to Harris Sheep. Harris has come to each and every session of the book club, and we believe around these parts that elected officials are not benighted. We believe that folks should be servants of the community, and Harris, in my mind, really embodies that. As you see, Harris was the first one to stand up and get that bowl. And that's how I experienced her. And I think it's important to know who's in the rooms, and I think it's important to know who's not in the rooms. And I want to say thank you so much, Harris, for always being here. And welcome, I'm so happy to have you. And I also, while the bowl is passed around, wanted to acknowledge a few people. I want to acknowledge the library staff, Louise, Robin, who else is here? Well, of course, my. Oh, Phyllis, I feel like Molly and I are about twins to do she wants. And, I also want to acknowledge the folks from E4E. If you're a member of the E4E, raise your hand. This is, we've been together, we say that this is our anniversary. Because E4E gathered after the first book club series that we had on reparations about 3 years ago. And we formed an intergenerational, very diverse community of people. And we are, so happy that they come to these volunteers.
I'm sorry?
I would also want to acknowledge
Remember we
the,
gave them out that one
women of the
time?
movement.
I'm gonna get one to my son. Okay. Give me mine. You can't give me mine.
I wrote something and this is, okay. And I wanted to acknowledge and say thanks all so much.
See, you know, I have.
And, we are about to get to the questions, portions. But I want to say that I'm so happy about the part that you're here. So last week we talked about enslavement until about the 1960s. We got right up to 1969. And then tonight we're glad to have Blair and Lois Deloatch join us. Next week, Dr. Parker, whose mother was one of the chief organizers in the labor movement in 1969, house workers movement.
Yes.
Will walk us through that history. So we are so happy to Dr. Parker, the hardest worker in history. It has been, and we appreciate it. We can't wait for next week. So I just wanted to thank everybody as a Braxton and the rest of the pioneers. What we're going to do next week is we're going to have a participatory activity. And I want to prepare you today for what's going to happen next week. Next week, we are going to write our own history. We're going to follow the tradition that Blair has set. And what we're going to do is have historical witnesses in the room. And with those historical witnesses, we are going to add to the archive at Wilson Library and Chapel Public Library. So when you see a name of a janitor on a card, you will also see this person was a leader in there. My Aunt Luce she was in the laundry, but she was also head stewardess in church. And so we want to talk a little bit about how we can write history for ourselves. So this is a very special activity that we're going to do, and then we're going to give it to people over at Wilson Library. So when people do research on it, people put that on, they will know that we will be. So I want you to think about that, and we're going to be led by historical witnesses. And lastly, of course, I want to thank my husband and my son, Keith. Yes. Let me tell you, when you don't have no hands, it's all right. It'd be like 3 generations of movement folks. We've got some hands in the room, and also I said, I see you, and I said, it's a James K. Scholar, so James K. Scholars in the house. Thank you so much. Okay, Derek Davis, who's head of the James K.
There's another Kate Scholar in the other room.
Who's the other?
Isaiah. He said, don't tell somebody.
Oh, okay, but this was okay. All right, so Simona, would you lead us through a quick Q&A? Oh, and the last thing I was gonna say is that Blair, I'm a little happy to her time. Maybe sure she
Can I dismiss this one?
a whole lot of stuff, and she said she'd be happy to stop this. So we're in the time for that too.
Who has a question?
Oh, yeah. Hey, hi, just a couple of compliments. There are I think the next book that I enjoyed, one of the things you brought up that was so revealing to me is when we think Black life is the opposite of white life. When we are the past, the present, and we make our future, and there's an excellence in who we are and the potential of who we can become. Maybe consider for your next book.
Lord, you know.
But it's not the opposite of white life, because I think that is where people sometimes find themselves, and it's not true, because we really are the opposite of anything. We're innovative, and the essence of who we are is having a voice like yours to remind others that we are more than what we see. So that was one of the things I wanted to say. And for Ms. Deloatch, I just say this now. What interests me about what she said, and she may have left already. Okay, what interests me about what you said was, even though you can't control the circumstances around you, you don't have to be complicit in denying your humanity. And that's very important. And it alludes to what you said, Danita, about how we did not know a whole lot. And the people that we saw in our community, they were princesses, queens, kings. They were the essence of what made us so special. So we never saw them differently. They were always elevated. And what surprised me as a young man was how you could teach a 3-year-old white child to call a woman who could be her grandmother by her first name. I thought it was very disrespectful, but at the time, it was what was considered normal. But for us, it was never that. So that's all I wanted to say.
It's a good story about the names thing. How me and Mr. Nita talked about that, and I didn't say it, so he gave me a shot. So one of my favorite things is that my grandfather and his brothers were all named names that were initials. So S-T-O-B and J-D. Because he did not want anyone to call his sons by their first name, so they have a first name. Now, mind you, S-T was E-S-T-E-E, right? So it was a name, but he wanted, when people heard it, he figured it would be like, oh, that's Mr. Dunn. And so, and my favorite thing is that his name was Solicitor. So when you call him by his first name, he called him Solicitor. So I assume his father also was trying to resist that demeanor.
There was a way, I don't remember how we did it, when we had George, I think it was the George White, where I could see this, but I could also see that. There was something else we did.
Writing of history and the living and witnessing, we're not Q&A, we are discussing.
Well, I just wanted to say, because Blair and I had that conversation about names. And one thing I love about Chapel Hill is our ability to name ourselves in our community. So you might have been born with a particular name that your parents gave you, but in Chapel Hill, everybody had a nickname. Everybody had a nickname. And Mike and I were doing some history sessions with some elders in the community, and we were trying to figure out people's names. And somebody would say, David Mason-Hogans. And we would look at elders and people, no, I don't know anybody David Mason-Hogans. And then all of a sudden somebody would say, trombone. Yeah, I think it was Dre, when my cousin Tinky passed away a couple of weeks ago, somebody said, I have to go to a funeral, and they said, oh, I said, it was my cousin Tinky. And they said, well, what is her real name? And I'm like, Tinky, that's it. But there's something really beautiful that our conversation illuminated about our determination to call ourselves our names that we, and that they're always, you know, I love it. I love the initials, and I didn't know that you could spell the name out too.
Yeah, O-B was O-B-I-E.
I think that is just so fun. Thank you for sharing.
That is interesting. I just wanted to add, that when we first moved out here, I thought it was interesting in the obituaries, it would have somebody's name and then the parentheses that anybody known as.
Yeah.
You know, because nicknames were so prevalent, but I thought it was great.
So what other offerings might you have?
What for your sister? Yeah.
First of all, thank you both so much, and thank you all for presenting this tonight. I was so excited to come. I purchased the book soon after, right after it came out, and I was so excited that there was literature about the Black working class. My family and I are Black Appalachians, and something a lot about daily life. A lot of it centers around labor. Something that you raised up was placement in society, and what is it they say? It's not what people call you, it's what you answer to. And so in our communities, it's so embedded. It's so embedded, and sometimes the identities that we have are so linked to that. And so for me, the beautiful thing about reading this, and the beautiful thing about the literature in and of itself, was the fact that oftentimes I feel as if literature that we speak about, there is Black exceptionalism, it is very real, but there are so many things that are everyday things that are happening that I feel like are not discussed and not spoken about. So first of all, Dr. Kelley, super excited to meet you, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you for presenting this and collecting this work of art so that it is in the world and so we can reflect on it more deeply.
When I first wrote the book, people said, "Oh, so you write about your family because they were very exceptional." And I said, "No, I wrote about my family because they weren't." And there's something beautiful about everyday people and the work that they got done anyway. One of my favorite things that happened in my household, we were watching 60 Minutes with my oldest and my husband. We were all just watching about the folks who were on that last slave ship. What the name of it again? But it, pardon? The Hilton. Thank you. And Ashley Cooper was interviewing somebody from the Smithsonian, and he said, "Well, how did they do it? They were just, they had just been enslaved, and then they built a whole town. How did they do it?" And the woman from Smithsonian said they made a way out of no way, actually. And it was just people said they made and my oldest looking at me like, never heard that. But it was a reminder for me that the things we know, the knowledge that we have, the way that we are, is so often not talked about and not recorded in our own voice. And so for me, Black folk was, sometimes I said things that I knew, I'm like, well, everybody knows this, but you still have to write that down. So when folks come up to me and say, "I'm from those Washington," and I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted us all to take pride in and to record in our own voices, the everyday experience of who we are, because the everyday is unique.
That's one of the things, that's one of the things that I love so much about your book. And I think as part of the work that we have to do right now is to interrogate what classism is, even in our community, who deserves to be written about, who deserves to be celebrated, and how that manifests itself. And it's not always the one with the highest degree, or even the one, I love that about the Pullman report, it's about the washerwomen. It is the movement that everyday people contributed to. And I love that about your writing. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about us looking at history through that lens too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, the historians have had the records of the most, you know, lifted up, the most high, the most learned from this earlier time period. So I think of Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham's work, or I think of, you know, the writing on Anna Jordan Cooper, Paula Giddens' work, around women's history from the same time period in the club women. But what's important to remember is that those women, even though they were elite, they were living in communities. And I read about Magdalena Walker in here, and she was the daughter of a washerwoman, so she ended up being a banker and owning a very big home and successful. And she said, "I am here because I was a washerwoman first." And she carries their stories, she carries the meaning of their lives with her everywhere she goes. So even though she was successful, she still lived in community, and she still used the power she had to advocate for others. So as much as we now think that success means like a getaway from everyday life, for me, any success I have is built on these people. These are my ancestors, and I bring them with me everywhere I go. I bring the congregation with me because I am not here because I'm special. They weren't allowed to come here. They weren't allowed to run the National Community Center. They weren't allowed to be a student at Chapel Hill. They weren't allowed to be at UVA or Duke or any campus I've ever been on. So the idea that somehow it's me and I'm special and unique, no, we are all quite special. And if they had let us participate, you would have seen it then. And so the idea that somehow I need to separate from my people because now finally in this one generation, you finally included Black people in these institutions. Well, I'm going to come with my people because they have wisdom, they have knowledge, and they have capability, and they are my foundation. That's my story with them.
Well, she kind of glossed over it. Did you hear about the part where she's the director of the National Piano? I just want to mention we have the first Black woman who is the head. Miss Addie, is Miss Addie still here? Last week, we did a tribute to your aunt, Miss Rebecca Clark.
Yes.
And one of the things that resonated with me so strongly is that in her beautiful voice, she took very serious pride. Somebody asked her what she did. She said, "I'm a housekeeper." And she advocated for other people. And that was the same pride that I heard coming up. I've never understood why people would not be proud of the work that people did. As a matter of fact, back in Chapel Hill, if you couldn't work with your hands, that was something that was a problem. So I don't know if you have any questions for Blair, but I just want to say that I was talking with Miss Addie this week, and Miss Addie was almost jumping out of her seat. She resonated with that book so well and so much. And Blair, your book really touches people in a way that is beautiful because we see ourselves and the people we love through your life. So,
one of the quotes that you pulled in the program, I asked you before we started, I said, is that from the book? And you said, I think, I was like, I trust you.
I was like, Molly, was it Molly did it?
It was fine. It was something I think and believe, but I didn't remember. I couldn't tell you where it was from, what part of the book it came from, because in part, this is ancestral work. They made this way for me to write this book. They presented the things that I needed to know to do this work. I began to start to expect them to show up to teach me the story of my ancestor Henry. When my mother was alive, we had no information about him. As that part of my family tree, I couldn't find a soul on it. I couldn't get past my grandfather. And I was so frustrated. And my mother passed about 12 years ago. And I was just playing the ancestry well before I started this book. And that tree started to open up. And just open up and open up. And it opened up to a person who I could find the records of the person who owned him. And tell his story. And then it opened up to the point where I could find my ancestor's name in the will. And I knew as a historian, his name wasn't gonna be there. This man owned 200 some people. I knew my training from Duke University taught me that people who own that many folks didn't write the names of individuals in them. And it was 2 in the morning in the middle of the pandemic, and I found the will, and something said to me, read it. It's in handwriting, so it's hard to specifically read them. Took a class on that UVA on how to decipher the handwriting as an undergrad. And I'm just sitting, I read for an hour, and I saw that big H. I was like, oh, I think that's the thing. And I didn't know he was a blacksmith till I read that, and a blacksmith. So for me to act like, oh, I'm such a great historian, and this is how I, no, this is the work that wants to be told. And I'm just a conduit for it.
Those ancestors you found, they find you. They find you in the archive. And what I didn't do is to shout out, some of the wonderful students at UNC. Sophia, is Taylor here?
She's really early.
Okay, who else is here from your group? Is it just you right now?
Yeah, just.
Yeah, well, Sophia is an archivist, and there are probably about 5 or 6 young people who found me and said it's really important for us during our tenure here at UNC to contribute to whatever we can to the community. And I think that reflects a different day that we're in that's characterized by those ancestors that find us and say we need to connect to the community. And anyway, I forgot to acknowledge you, Sophia, but I love you and I appreciate it. Any more questions? Robin has questions.
I got my own mic.
Free for you.
Yeah.
Don't really get right.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Kelley to talk about or think about, because as you guys were talking about the ways in which people engaged with workers, I remember as a young person, my sister taught me, she was very stern about when I interact with people in service positions, as we call them now, that I greet them, I never put money on the counter because those things were considered rude. And I had a conversation maybe a few months ago with a younger person who's maybe Gen Z, and they made the observation of how certain communities interact with people in service work differently than others. And one of the things that I was relaying to her was that even though the reasons aren't shared, generationally, our grandparents lived in a time where they were relegated to service work and they didn't have that respect. So others in our community were taught to ensure that we gave them that respect. And people in different communities were taught that they didn't have to engage with or acknowledge people who were served, who they considered as service to them. They didn't have to greet them. When you said the thing about people snapping at them, I was taught that that is the ultimate sign of disrespect to a person who is in a service position, is to snap at them and expect them to respond. And I told the young person that generationally, when you go back and you look at 2 communities existing side by side, one held power that if our grandparents did not respond to that snap in a certain way, it could have life-threatening consequences. And that was taught to our parents. And then our parents then taught that to us. And those parallel communities were taught that they could interact with service people in certain ways. Even if the reasons were not shared, the behaviors were learned and they were shared in that way. And so now we have 2026 and we still have these 2 parallel sets of behaviors and ways that we engage with people who are in service industries. I know, I'm sorry, I know that wasn't really a question.
I mean, you know, what was one of the most powerful things for me was moving through these institutions that have been primarily white history by law and by guidance and by force. that as I moved through those institutions, I moved differently.
Yes.
And I moved knowing that I'm only there because of the people who worked there over the generation. So people said, don't you feel out of place at UVA? When I was an undergrad, and I was like, well, my ancestors laid these bricks. They fired them. This is their genius. Thomas Jefferson couldn't lay a brick. And so those 13 walls that are part of my history of the world, right? They're a World Heritage Site. That's my ancestry for it. And so I'm never feeling like that. This is not my place. This is absolutely continuity is my place. And so I'm going to treat the people who are there with respect and kindness and of richness and a fullness of food. Because I was raised, that's my grandmother. That's my community. Those are the people I go to church with. And I love that my child does not know what anybody in our church does. I have a East Missionary Baptist Church where my pastor is the Reverend Dr. D. Gregory Senior. And you don't know if someone is a postal worker, a janitor, president of the bank, and you don't know. We're all just there, and we are all congregants, and we're all ready to serve. And so I love that upending of confusion about like I am above and I am below. We're all equals. And I think what's been powerful is that sometimes other students will say, well, why are they treating you nicer in the cafeteria, or why are they helping you? I'm like, cause I know Miss Jones. Like I talk to her every week. I come and see her. And she's cheering for me. Do you talk to Miss Jones? Like, you should. She's really great. Like, so my path was laid by the people who were working there as I was moving through that space too, because I just bothered to be respectful, and they were cheering me on because they knew what it meant to be there and how hard it was going to be, and they were showing up for me. So I'm always in community. Like, I got a different community in any space. I've been at dinner where people who are not part of my community are serving. And I'm saying, thank you so much. May I please have, I appreciate you tonight. I hope you have a good night. Get home safe. Like, and people are looking at me like, why is she talking? So but they don't even see where they are, who's around them. But I see it. Heck, I did that where I worked at a supermarket. I served tables. I did all that work. And so, a workman is too is labor. And you should respect everybody in any space with you.
And I think that is so, that resonated with me too. My parents were movement people. And so that respectability stuff is so layered, because when I'm interacting with a SNCC folk, they get so upset when I call them Mr. So-and-so, Miss so-and-so. Because a lot of folks in the 60s, as a response to the way that people were infantilized, how you say infantilized, thank you. The way that they were infantilized, as a pushback, a lot of people from the 60s didn't use those terms of Mr. and Miss. They called people by their name. And some folks, that is the way that they moved. The more I learned about history, the more assistant I became of calling people Miss and Mr. And because of the thing that you said about, because I've seen too many times people look past my grandmother or my grandfather, and I know what they have done for this community. So for me, it's going to be Mr. and Ms. all the time. And when I started to assume some supervisory roles, the first thing I would do is sit in the chair of the receptionist, because my mother was a receptionist, and see if people greeted me and see if people saw me. And those are the people that I want to work with. Because if you didn't see me, you might not see the people that I work with, and that's important to me. But the beautiful thing also about Chapel Hill that people don't know in terms of laborers see things. People always see things. We were in the kitchen with Frank Porter. My aunt and my uncle, they worked for the Fridays. So Black people in Chapel Hill have always been witness to the duality of people who espouse this great liberal, sort of, ideology. And we're ignored in their homes. I hear that too. So, thank you for that conversation. That was good. We have one more question. Oh, wait a minute now. We got two now because Braxton wants to get to a question.
I don't know, of course.
I'll bring it back.
I don't have a question, but we had a history in our neighborhood. And that was Grandma Fry. Yeah. Who stayed, these are three sisters. That we grew up together. And they know exactly what I'm talking about. And so we would go to her house. In the afternoon. And we would ask her about her young age. And she was, that's what I learned about history. And all of us did, same place.
Grandma Flat, she was enslaved, right? Was she a poor?
She was 113, was she saying? And we would just gather every day. And she questions to her. And, you know, when we got to school, we knew what was going on.
Braxton, what year was this? What are we talking? Brady.
Well, that
one.
well, that more than 40. Because I was about 10, so it had to be 49. No, more than 49, 39. And she stayed right down in an old house. No light, no running water. And we would gather in her front yard. And she would teach us history.
I heard you mention her before when I started doing research, because I was like, I want to be like her. And she's connected to labor, because it's my understanding that she took care of the neighborhood children.
Oh, yeah.
While people were at work and told them stories about grievances. And
About her
I would
growing
be like
up
her
and how it was. So when Carolyn, it hurt, sad enough. And well, the whole neighborhood.
I mean, she was sitting on her porch, and people would be all around this yard, sitting on the ground, listening to her stories.
Right.
And that was it.
Thanks for sharing that.
Passing it back.
You done?
There we go.
Take care, guys.
I'm just thinking about labor and respectability. And thinking about Black women specifically. We carry some of the most degrees, we're in spaces, and even then, we're still overlooked. Our labor is overlooked, our voice, our contributions are overlooked. Can you just speak to that, as someone who has traversed through these institutions and what it means to still not have the labor acknowledged?
I don't want to talk about my own, but we'll be here all night. I think what's really powerful, I'm asked to give a talk called Black Jobs for Black History Month. And what was really interesting is I was talking about the history of the
Time is now 7:50. The library will be closing in 10 minutes at 8 o'clock. We'll be closing in 10 minutes at 8 o'clock.
And it's really powerful to think about the ways in which the attacks on government workers at this moment were probably very precisely because someone went to Washington the first time and saw hundreds, if not thousands, of Black women in positions of prominence because the government had been that very first place where Black people could have opportunities to work. that corporations did not hire Black people in white collar positions at all until the late 1960s, and then it would be a handful of people maybe. And then finally in the 70s, there was like a small grouping of people, but the main places where Black workers had opportunities for advancement as workers and the upbuilding of the Black middle class happens through federal employment. If you look at the numbers of who the Black middle class are in the 1970s, which is the peak, in terms of the wealth gap, right? So that Black workers are as close to white workers as possible in the late 1970s. They are government workers, or the children of government workers who finally get college educations and access and opportunity. So the firing of 300,000 Black women for federal employment and over the past year is not an accident. The historic attacks on the post office that began under George W. Bush, undercutting the pension plan, making the postal workers meet a standard for their pension that they must fund it for 70-some years ahead, currently making the post office look like an insolvent institution when it's not. That's not an accident. So in some communities, 70% of postal workers are Black American. And so there's no accident that the things that were finally the wedge of opportunity and equality are the first things that get attacked. And that they've built a narrative that they are not that good and not excellent. And, these other spaces are going to be so much better. Because there are Black people in those spaces. It made me think of Woodrow Wilson, who instituted segregation in our nation's capital, eroding the progress that Black people have made since Reconstruction and federal employment, caging Black workers, literally putting Black workers in cages if they were working in federal jobs in the city, firing thousands of people. None of those things, they've been done before. So it's important to know that we've been here before and we know how to get back. But they have devastating impacts on our wealth, on our ability to move forward. And that those impacts will be felt for generations if we don't correct them urgently. So that's what I think about when I think about access to jobs and being in those spaces. That they matter. They are the building blocks of how Black people have had anything.
So, I'm just so grateful. I'm so humbled that Lois, you shared the beautiful gifts and talent. When you're thinking about proud, I'm just a witness to the beauty of your ancestors through you, Blair, and your brilliance and the way that you hold all of us in your vision. And so thank you so much for that. Thank y'all for showing up in community. It is so special to come into a room with people from different backgrounds, different ages, to learn about this community and history together. And this is our third year doing such a tradition. And so we want to invite you to continue the journey next week. When we'll have Dr. Freddie Parker, and we'll talk about the food workers strike of 1969. So we journeyed up until this point, and we're going to learn some more. I think Robin has a beautiful display. We'll switch it up a little bit next week. Shane's going to give us some of his turkey barbecue next week. So we're going to be here again next Thursday. Molly, thank you so much. Did you have anything to share? Okay, so
We're gonna table it.
okay, but I did was gonna bring the table. If you have a book that you would like for Blair to sign.
Oh, you got it. Okay, great.
Can I go ahead and stop the webinar?
Yeah.